Diabetes Connections is brought to you by One Touch. Every touch is a step forward. By Dexcom. Take control of your diabetes and live life to the fullest with Dexcom. And by No Foods, no grain, no gluten, no guilt.
This is Diabetes Connections with Stacey Sims.
This week, you've likely heard that Loop may become the first do-it-yourself diabetes system to go to the FDA. But why did Tidepool decide to take on this challenge?
It just felt like something we had to do. Like it was something like I can't in good conscience say, hey, look at this awesome thing that's available to my daughter and maybe 1,000 or 1,500 other people when I know there are 1.5 million people in the U.S. and how many tens of millions of people living with type 1 around the world. We got to help.
That's Howard Look, the CEO of Tidepool. He'll explain how this is all going to work and what it means for those of us interested in DIY, but not willing to use out-of-warranty pumps or do a lot of programming ourselves. And of course, we'll explain what Loop actually is. Plus, a French company announces they're a step closer to approval of their hybrid closed loop. We'll talk about Diabeloop. This podcast is not intended as medical advice. If you have those kinds of questions, please contact your healthcare provider. Welcome to Diabetes Connections. I'm Stacey Sims. So glad to have you along. Happy Thanksgiving week. If you're traveling or you're getting ready to have people come to you, or maybe you're having a quiet Thanksgiving, whatever the case may be. Wow, I can't believe we are here at this time of November. This year is flying by. If you are new to the show, welcome. So glad you found us. My son was diagnosed with type 1 diabetes just before he turned 2. That was 12 years ago. My husband lives with type 2 diabetes. I don't have diabetes, but I do have a background in broadcasting, local radio and television news. That's how you get the podcast. And here on the show, we aim to educate and inspire about type 1. And I think this week we really are doing that. I mean, I caught up with Howard Look at the D-Data Summit, the Diabetes Mind Innovation Summit that happened in San Francisco recently. Thrilled to be selected as a patient advocate to go out there. And, talking to Howard about these issues really is helpful because he speaks English at my level. I mean, I'm kind of kidding, but there was so much high-level data, technology, conversation going on at this conference that it was a big relief, I'm not going to lie, to talk to Howard. And I'll be bringing you more interviews from that conference in the weeks to come. Before we go any further, let me talk a little bit about what Loop is. Now, on this show, we have had many episodes where we talked about do-it-yourself, artificial pancreas, OpenAPS, and I will link up information and links back to those episodes in the show notes. As longtime listeners know, those show notes are there for every episode. Go to diabetes-connections.com or click on the show itself in any of the podcast apps out there. You can just hit more information or details. Every single one of them is a little bit different, but they do have the show notes. So I'll link up a lot of those show notes, and we've done a lot of information on that in the past. But Loop is just a little bit different. Loop is an app template for building an automated insulin delivery system. It builds on the work that a lot of other people have done, and it's an iOS app. It's only Apple right now that connects your CGM with an insulin pump to your phone. And then your phone helps you not only make adjustments, but shows you everything that's going on. It's a very detailed display. And really the biggest barrier, they say, or I'll say the biggest pain in the butt, is that you have to find a compatible pump. You need an old pump that doesn't have the kind of security, I hate to use that word, but doesn't have the security that the more modern pumps have. I mean, basically, there was a way in which these pumps communicated via radio frequency. And then for safety, to prevent people from hacking into your pump, they changed that. They closed it up. But you need that in order to have Loop or any of these OpenAPS protocols. So there are old Medtronic pumps, stuff like that, but none of them are under warranty anymore. And people like me who have a child with type 1 and are not comfortable with out-of-warranty pumps and are not comfortable with my own technical know-how, even though I've been told many, many times by guests on this show to get over myself and just get it done. I'm not doing that. So when I heard about Loop going to the FDA, thanks to Tidepool, it really made me sit up and take notice. Because with FDA approval, and with other pumps in warranty pumps. This is really something that will reach many, many more people, and Howard will talk about that in just a couple of minutes. I also wanted to let you know, and I'll talk about this more at the end of the show, that Pandora is getting into the podcasting business. So if you are a big Pandora user, you know that I think they have like 3 podcasts right now. They run some NPR podcasts, but this is not really their bread and butter. But they announced last week that they are going to use their fabulous algorithms that recommend music that you'll like to recommend podcasts that you'll like. And as I'll tell you a little bit later, we've known about this for a while because we were selected as one of really just a handful of podcasts to be part of the testing, which was pretty exciting stuff. Okay, much more to come, but first, Diabetes Connections is brought to you by Dexcom. When we look at Dexcom throughout the day, as we have for 5 years now, it'll be 5 years at the end of December, it is incredibly helpful to head off highs and lows and to help us help our son, help Benny manage his diabetes. But I also love Clarity, the diabetes management software system from Dexcom. It's an easy way to keep track of the big picture. You know, when I check it, and I try to keep it to about once a week, I don't know about you, but I can get carried away with too much information sometimes. But about once a week, it really helps me dial back and see longer-term trends. And it helps me not to overreact to what happened for just one day or even just 1 hour. I can do that. You do get an overlay report, and that helps put context to patterns, and you can send Clarity reports right to your care team. I love that. Our endo finds it so helpful. And I got to say, the last couple of years with tween and teen hormones has been pretty difficult, I would say. And I can't imagine doing it without these reports. It helps prioritize the real issues. Find out more at diabetes-connections.com and click on the Dexcom logo. My guest this week is Howard Look. He is the CEO of Tidepool, and he joined us in April of 2016 to really talk about Tidepool and why he started it. His daughter was diagnosed with type 1 in 2011, and at that time, Howard was really frustrated with the lack of access to her diabetes data. Tidepool is a not-for-profit company focused on, they say, liberating data from diabetes devices, supporting researchers, and providing great free software to people with diabetes and their care teams. Basically, if you want to see your CGM and pump data in an easy place, Tidepool can do that. And as a nonprofit and with open source, they're in a very unique position. So the announcement to help shepherd Loop through the FDA makes a lot of sense. But it was still a very big deal. And Omnipod, or Insulet, the makers of Omnipod, announced really shortly before this interview, I think it was just hours before this interview, that they were partnering on this. So we have fingers crossed that other pump companies will join in and do this as well. I asked Howard about that. What are the challenges and what's in it for them? But, Tidepool will not own Loop, but they will be responsible for the process. It sounds kind of complicated. I asked Howard to explain it all, and I started off by asking him, why was Tidepool interested in Loop at all?
Why was Tidepool interested in Loop? If I take a step back and I look at Tidepool as a company, we're really a bunch of people who are just trying to make things better for people in the diabetes community. My daughter has type 1 diabetes. We're up to 17 employees now, 16 of whom have a personal connection to diabetes. And of those 16, 11 of us are actually using Loop, either for ourselves or for our kids. And so the do-it-yourself community, the We Are Not Waiting community, has been a part of our DNA from the very beginning. And over the last couple of years, we realized we could actually be helpful as an organization because we've established a great relationship with the FDA, because we have great relationships with device partners. And so when we looked at all of that, and the fact that we're in the pre-certification pilot program, we said, holy cow, there's actually an incredible opportunity here to take this wonderful piece of software that is Loop and actually do the work to put it in the App Store so that people don't have to build it themselves and they don't have to go find used Medtronic pumps on the gray market to use it with. So we said to ourselves, let's go do that. We actually sent an email to the FDA saying, hey, we'd like to talk to you about this. Would this be something you'd be interested in? And to our wonderful, pleasant surprise, the team at the FDA, Courtney Elias and Stacey Beck and Alon Silk and Naomi Schwartz, they said, yeah, come talk to us. We would definitely like a company to step up and take responsibility for Loop. And we thought, that's great. We want to do that too.
As someone who observes but does not yet participate in the We Are Not Waiting, the Night Scouts, the Loop, the OpenAPS, my family doesn't use any of that. Who owned Loop? All of this seems so amorphous. How can you, work with it that way?
So Loop is like a lot of open source projects, and no one really owns it. No one and everybody owns it, right? It's an open source project that is being developed and maintained by the community. Now, originally, Nate Raycliffe, and it might be pronounced Nate Rackliffe, I'm not 100% sure, so we should check with Nate. Nate wrote Loop mostly on his own. He ended up getting some help over time, and he actually wrote a wonderful blog post about it on Medium, which I highly recommend all of your listeners read. It tells an incredible history of the We Are Not Waiting movement and how people like Ben West and Pete Schwam and Nate just rallied and brought all their different skills together in order to make this. So the way open source works is you put your code out there, you make it freely available, you put an open source license on it, and in Loop's case, he chose the MIT license, which is one of the extremely open and permissive licenses. It basically says you can do whatever you want with this code. We take no liability for it. There are no warranties at all. Just take it and do whatever you want. And that's a pretty wonderful thing. That is a great way to release your open source software, because you're basically saying to the world, take it and do what you see fit.
Now, as we're talking, though, I kind of made a face because it sounds like a great open source, but it also sounds like a bit of intimidation or scary to parents and people with type 1 who aren't as technical.
Sure.
But when I hear FDA is going to get involved in it now, do they change things? Do they go in? How does that work?
Well, the FDA is not going to go in and change the software, but what we are signing up to do as Tidepool is we are going to do all of the documentation necessary to show that Loop is safe and effective. And at the end of the day, that's what the FDA wants. They want to know that some organization, some entity has stepped up and raised their hand and said, we're taking responsibility for this. And so that's what Tidepool is doing when it comes to Tidepool Loop. We are saying we will be what's officially known as the registered entity. We are a registered facility with the FDA, and we are listing the product. So when you hear people say it's registered and listed, what they're really saying is we've filed the forms necessary so that the FDA knows who we are and knows what the product is. And that's what Tidepool is stepping up to do.
I'll ask again, why would you do this? Why does Tidepool want to be that responsible party? This is a lot of work for a company that didn't seem to be in the pump software, kind of business.
Well, I think that's the same question you would ask of any nonprofit or even any participant in an open source community. Like anyone who volunteers their time or their effort towards a mission, you hear a lot the notion of paying it forward. Like there are now thousands of people using Night Scout and OpenAPS and Loop who all feel like, wow, my kid or I myself am getting better care because of the efforts of others, and I want to pay it forward. I want to help other people also get the same benefits that I'm getting. So we've always had the mentality as a nonprofit that we're not in this for money. We're in this to help the community and make things better. And when we looked at all the things that were lining up, our participation in the pre-cert program, the availability of this incredible open source project that so many of our employees use, our great relationship with the FDA, our ability to create arrangements with device companies to let us talk to their devices, it just felt like something we had to do. Like I can't, in good conscience, say, hey, look at this awesome thing that's available to my daughter and maybe 1,000 or 1,500 other people when I know there are 1.5 million people in the U.S. and how many tens of millions of people living with type 1 around the world. We got to help.
Well, I'm one of those people who's very excited because I will not go on an out-of-warranty pump.
Right.
It's just not something that I feel okay about for my son. I mean, as he gets older, he can make those decisions. Yeah. But that one of the reasons I was so excited was to hear about that kind of development. You announced here that Insulet is going to be the first pump company. And before we move on, I'll ask this question. Let's take a moment and thank them for doing that.
Insulet's been great. They should get a huge amount of credit for being the first pump company to step up and say, yep, we understand that people living with diabetes should have choice. And if they want to have a closed loop controller running on their phone, they should get that choice. And Loop and Omnipods is just a natural fit. People have been asking for it forever, and I'm really excited that Insulet has stepped up to partner with us on that.
And as you've said, you're talking to other pump companies as well. What does it take when you have those conversations? Not to get too inside here, and I don't know exactly how much you can tell me, but they're trying to make money. They're trying to stay afloat. They're trying to push their product. They have their own algorithms that they're all working with. What are those conversations like? What are you trying to convince them of? Right back to Howard in just a moment. But first, Diabetes Connections is brought to you by OneTouch. Handwriting your blood glucose levels is the ultimate throwback. The OneTouch VarioFlex meter seamlessly syncs with the free OneTouch Reveal mobile app to create your dynamic electronic logbook. And when you choose the OneTouch Reveal mobile app, you'll be joining thousands of other people living with diabetes. In fact, OneTouch Reveal was the #1 downloaded diabetes management app in the US, Canada, France, and the UK. To upgrade today to the OneTouch VarioFlex meter and OneTouch Reveal mobile app, visit diabetes-connections.com and click on the OneTouch logo. Now back to Howard Look, convincing the pump companies to jump on board.
Well, I don't know that we always need to convince them. At a lot of these companies, there are people inside the company who really understand the value of giving choice to people living with diabetes. But as you said, at the end of the day, it's a business. They're running a business. But I do think there's a strong case to be made that giving that choice is going to help their business. There's going to be a whole lot of people not currently on Omnipod who now may choose to switch to Omnipod because Loop is available for the Omnipod Dash. And I think that will be true of other device makers as well. At the end of the day, they are selling pumps and selling disposable supplies that go with the pumps. And if we can help them attract more people to their system because we are providing a closed-loop controller on the phone, that's going to help them grow their business.
You mentioned the pre-certification process. Do you mind explaining what that is and what that means?
So a couple of years ago, the FDA announced that they were launching a program called the FDA Pre-Certification Pilot Program. And the very short version of it is that it's an effort to redo how the FDA regulates medical software. And if you look back over the last 5, 10, 15, 20 years, you realize a lot of the current guidance documents and a lot of the current regulations really did not contemplate the internet or didn't contemplate smartphones or didn't contemplate the Apple Watch. And what we see happening is this digital health revolution where incredible things can happen with these technologies, but the regulatory paradigm for looking at and improving software has not kept up. And that's not been good for public health. What you really want to do, if you really are serious about promoting and protecting public health, is come up with a way that makes it easy for companies to iterate quickly while still being safe and effective and to get their innovative solutions to market more quickly. So the pre-certification pilot program has that goal, to come up with a new way to look at and regulate software. They put out a call for companies to apply to be pilot participants and said, hey, if you're willing to open the kimono and show us how you build software and show us why you think your organization is excellent at building software, we'd like you to come in. And so hundreds of companies applied. We were one of 9 that were chosen. We're a little different than all the other companies. Let's see if I can remember all of the other 8. It's Roche, Johnson & Johnson, Verily, which is formerly Google Health Life Sciences, Apple, Fitbit, Samsung, Pear Therapeutics, Phosphorus. That's the 8. And then Tidepool is the 9th company. So the other 8 companies are all larger for-profit companies. Some of them are extremely large. Sometimes I joke that Roche and Johnson & Johnson have more people on their regulatory team than we have in our whole company. But we are far and away the smallest company, and we're the only nonprofit, and we're the only open source company. And that's been kind of cool because it means that we can fully open the kimono. Like, all of our code is open source. All of our processes are open source. Our entire regulatory quality system is open to the public to inspect. And so, again, back to our desire to pay it forward and support our nonprofit mission of helping the diabetes community. By being open, we feel like sharing all of that as we participate in the program is good for everybody.
During your presentation, you showed your daughter's rig, the original,
that
rig.
was the original OpenAPS rig.
Yes, and then talked about your journey, with Loop. And do you mind sharing, how has her life changed because of Loop?
So here is the greatest thing, and I don't think Katie would mind me sharing this. Katie was diagnosed when she was 11, just as middle school was starting, and it was a shock to us and a shock to her. And, as you know, because your kid has it too, it's a royal stinking pain in the ass. And all you want for your kid is to live a healthy, normal life and do things that teenagers do and do things that kids do. And I think, like a lot of families, we struggled early on because it's hard. Computing insulin doses is hard. Knowing when you should ask your kid if they check their blood sugar or if they bolused for a meal, or do they still have fresh insulin in the pump. Like, these are all things you don't want to have to nag your kid about. And so the biggest change for us when Katie initially went on OpenAPS and then later went on Loop is we really don't talk about her diabetes anymore. It's pretty incredible. Part of that is her. Like, she has grown older, she is more mature, and she really does want to handle it herself. But part of it is she doesn't have to think about it as much. Like, it's okay if she misses a meal bolus because Loop will just do its thing and give her more insulin and bring her blood sugar down. And as parents, we used to get up, as a lot of parents do, in the middle of the night, multiple times a night. My wife and I used to trade off nights, getting up to check her blood sugar. And once she was on OpenAPS and then Loop, we didn't need to do that anymore. Like, we just had confidence that the system was going to work. And it would catch low blood sugars, or it would gently bring her down when she had high blood sugar in the middle of the night. And more often than not, she would just wake up in this, beautiful, 100 to 120 kind of range every day.
Looking ahead, and I know you can't tell me everything, I'm curious what Tidepool is thinking, because I'll be honest, I didn't expect this kind of announcement this year. I thought, you've got the great data, you're open source, everybody's able to share, and you were sharing a lot of really excellent information that you were taking in from the community. Where do you see this all going? Are you going to be doing more things like this?
So I'm never good at predicting the future. And, 2 years ago, if you had asked me, do you think you'll be working on a closed loop system? I'm sure I wouldn't have predicted that either. I would say this idea that we could be helpful in the do-it-yourself ecosystem by bridging the gap between the do-it-yourself community and regulators and device companies started to take shape when we were participating early in the pre-cert program. We started asking questions like, well, if we do this kind of appraisal, how will that apply to the do-it-yourself community? And then somewhere along the way, we started asking questions like, well, what if somebody came to you with a closed-loop algorithm? How would that work as part of the pre-cert program? And we were co-creating with the FDA as we were asking all those questions. Early this year, I would say, is when the metaphor I use is the Wayne Gretzky's dad very famously said, you don't skate to where the puck is, you skate to where the puck is going. And it dawned on us that there were a bunch of pucks that were all converging. Like, one was the FDA pre-certification pilot program, this whole new way of thinking about regulating software. Another was the do-it-yourself community, and really the incredible progress that the OpenAPS and Loop communities had made in delivering incredible, safe, effective solutions to the community that people really love. Another was the device makers who were starting to sit up and go, wait a minute, interoperability might just be a good thing for us. And right in the middle of all that, JDRF announced the Open Protocol Initiative, and then the Helmsley Trust and JDRF sponsored an open protocol summit where all the device companies got together to talk about interoperability. And then right around that time, to the FDA's incredible credit, and I think Courtney Elias and Stacey Beck should get huge kudos for this, they've been talking about interoperability for a while, but they actually put their money where their mouth is. The FDA said, let's create the iCGM designation. And they worked with Dexcom, and they came up with this new way of thinking about a CGM that would conform to what they call these special controls. They basically said, if you meet these performance criteria, we will grant you a de novo designation, which turns the Dexcom, which was the first device to do this, from a Class 3 device into a Class 2 device. So that de novo, with the special controls that are the performance characteristics that go with it, established a whole new class, a whole new regulatory class that other companies can now apply for. So other CGM companies can now say, well, we want to be an iCGM too. And that's pretty awesome because instead of being a Class 3 PMA submission, which is a pretty substantial thing both to submit and for the FDA to review, it's now a Class 2 510K submission, which is a much, much bigger deal. So anyway, that was another puck. And so you've got all these pucks that are sliding towards the same space. And the missing piece was a company willing to raise their hand, step up and say, we're going to be the company that takes responsibility and is the registered entity and listed, the registered and listed product for Loop. And we said, we'll do it.
Before I let you go, just two quick things. First, I just want to thank you for speaking English because, you are one of the few people that talks about these things and really it's understandable. And I know that made you laugh, but I do very much appreciate it. As a layperson who tries to educate themselves, it's very helpful because I think we often feel very detached from these processes and we can hear it spoken about that way. It's a wonderful thing. So thank you very much.
Well, I really appreciate you saying that. And I'll toot my own horn, I suppose, a little, which is one of my gifts is being a teacher of technical topics. So thank you for saying that. And I do consider that to be one of the things I'm obligated to do in my job now.
It's very helpful. And then the second is you are one of the people that made me realize that the FDA is not some walled off place where they're trying to keep things from people.
All.
Do you have any advice before I let you go for lay people like myself to get involved more or let the FDA know that we have opinions and we'd like to be heard? It sounds like they're listening.
The FDA is totally listening, and they are not this scary organization that people should be afraid of. They're actually a wonderful group of people who have devoted their careers to serving the public, and I actually think they should be commended for that. Like, I'm really glad they're there, and I'm really glad that they are smart, reasonable people that are just trying to help companies ship better products that are better, safer, more effective, promoting public health and safety. And my advice to people is go talk to them. And there are lots of venues and lots of opportunities to do that, both for patients and for companies.
Howard, thank you so much. I hope you come back and keep talking to us and keep us posted on what's going on. Exciting times.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for having me, Stacey. It's always great to see you.
You're listening to Diabetes Connections with Stacey Sims.
More information about Tidepool and Loop, and Howard referenced a blog post from Medium. I will link that up as well. I agree. It's an excellent look at the history and more about Loop and what it is. And man, this is pretty exciting stuff because as I have said for years, the We Are Not Waiting crowd is pushing industry in ways that are just speeding up this process, bringing great technology to market that might have sat on a shelf or that might have taken a lot longer to get to us. So even if you have no plans of using any do-it-yourself stuff, as I said, I've never used Night Scout. I don't use looping yet. I don't like the idea of an out-of-warranty pump for my son, but we are all benefiting from this, and hats off to them. And who knows what's going to come next, right? Who's tinkering with something right now that we are going to hear about soon? I love it. In our Know Better segment this week, a closed-loop system gets European approval. we will translate from the French. But first, Know Better is brought to you by Know Better Foods. I like Know Better for many reasons, but one of the big reasons is because it travels very well. And when I am traveling, like going to the Diabetes Mind Innovation Summit out in California, it's very helpful to pop a couple of the cookies in my bag because I know, when you're staying at a hotel, first of all, you have no idea, is there going to be any food at the hotel that you will eat? You're going gluten-free or eating a certain way, it can be very difficult to find what you need. So this way I know I have my cookies with me. One of these days I might bring the waffles, although I might get some funny looks if I bring those downstairs to the hotel breakfast. But why not? Know Better is grain and gluten-free, and they're perfect for a range of lifestyles. If you eat low carb, if you prefer keto, if, like me, you kind of eat everything in moderation, but you have been advised to go gluten-free by my physician, this is for you. And the food is good. It doesn't have that gritty, weird feel. Better versions of your favorite snacks made with real clean ingredients. Go to diabetes-connections.com, click on the No Foods logo, and as always, use the promo code Stacey10 at checkout to save. I first heard about Diabeloop, it's got to be more than a year ago, when I was speaking to someone from Dexcom, and they told me, off the record, that they thought Diabeloop was going to be the first to market with a closed loop system in Europe. And I reached out to Diabeloop, but maybe because I don't speak French, they did not get back to me at the time. This is a small company, about 50 employees. They've been partnering with Dexcom and Cellnovo to create their algorithm. They got their CE mark, which is kind of like FDA approval in Europe. Basically, they can move to the next level of funding and marketing to patients and healthcare systems. So the initial release, and they think this will happen early next year, which is honestly just a couple of weeks away. So we'll see. It uses the Dexcom G6 and a patch pump. I'm not sure I'm pronouncing it right. It's the Kaleido patch pump. You may have seen these online. They're very colorful. And it's not a true patch pump. It looks kind of like a very brightly candy-colored Omnipod, a little smaller, and it has a tiny little tube. So if you think about it as an Omnipod, if you're familiar with that, with maybe a 1/2 inch to 1 inch long tube that would then connect to an inset right next to the pump. Now, according to news releases, they are looking to integrate with other systems. Not quite sure what that means, but that is very interesting. And it also uses a locked down mobile phone. So that is pretty standard stuff for closed loop trials. I'm not quite sure how it's going to come to market, but this is a cell phone, but you can't do anything else with it. And I'm getting a lot of information on this from Tim at Diabetic. We've talked to Tim before. I will link up his very thorough blog and write-up of this. Tim, very much appreciate you, as always, for the work that you do. Now, Tim points out, and this was fascinating to me, this was a 12-week study with 33 people. 33 people. Doesn't that seem kind of small to you? That was pretty amazing to me. But hey, European CE mark is different from the FDA. Looked like it was very safe, worked very well. The time spent in target between 70 and 180 was almost 70%. And hypoglycemia, which they considered below 70, was only 2%. A lot to watch here. I did run into someone from Diabeloop at the conference in San Francisco and talked to him a little bit. I'm hoping to get him on the show soon. We shall see. But the idea of coming to America is not something that's going to happen quickly. Obviously, they would need FDA approval for that. But definitely something to watch. And I'll put the pictures up about what this looks like if you're having trouble seeing how that patch pump would look. And a bunch of companies are moving to this. This is the Lilly pump is going to look like this. The Tandem has something, blueprints for this. Again, it's a small patch pump with a tiny little tube so that you would still have an inset. And I personally think that's an advantage. I mean, I've never really worn an insulin pump, obviously. But I know that many people need different kinds of insets, angled or thinner or longer needle or, steel or whatever. There's different types. And when you have a patch pump, there's only one way it connects. So that can be a very big disadvantage for some people. So having this, being able to use an inset, but really close by, I think is going to be a very interesting rollout, and we'll see how it goes in the market. And I'll tell you, it's funny. I put this stuff out on Twitter. I retweet stuff all the time. And, my mom, Benny's grandmother, reads everything that I put out. And she reads a lot on diabetes, of course, herself. She's very involved and she's fantastic. We have a great relationship with my mom. And she texted me like, what does this mean for Benny? Can he get this? And we got into this conversation about all of the closed loops and the hybrid closed loops that are coming to market in the next couple of years. It's pretty amazing when you think about it. Wouldn't it be nice if suddenly this was a crowded marketplace with a lot of competition? We can kind of see it on the horizon, but it's a little bit hard to imagine. So check back in with me in a couple of years and we'll see if all of this really happens. Fingers crossed, right? And now you know better. Got some really interesting news last week about the podcast and about podcasting in general. It looks like Pandora is getting into the podcasting business. And Pandora is huge. I mean, there are more people on Pandora in a month than on Apple Podcasts in a year. So it's a really big deal for podcasting to have this happen. And I'm going to link up, it's not out yet. This is still in beta testing. But if you want to be part of Pandora at the launch, which will likely happen in December, there's a way that you can do that. You can sign up to get early access to podcasts on Pandora. And I will put that link in the show notes and in the Facebook group. And I got to tell you, I've been sitting on this news for a long time, probably since the middle of the summer. We were contacted by my podcast hosting company. It's called Liberated Syndication. That is how I link up the audio to send out to all the different podcasting hosts. Because if I can't program an insulin pump, there's no way I'm getting my podcast RSS feed out to anybody. But they helped me do that. I was contacted by Libsyn to be part of the launch. So we have been one of the, I think it's 400 shows that have been part of this beta testing on Pandora and will continue to be part of the testing as it's released and as more podcasts come on board. So thank you, Libsyn, for that huge show of confidence in Diabetes Connections. And I think a show of confidence in you as you listen. They know we have an engaged audience. They can see my numbers and see how people listen and all that kind of stuff. So I really appreciate you giving me these kinds of opportunities. And the biggest win here is that we're going to reach more people because let's face it, I'm here to provide information about type 1 diabetes and I want to be every place I can be to get that information out. So I'm asking you, if you want to sign up for Pandora, you can use the link. Please share the show any way you want to. Share it on social media, email a friend, text somebody. If you know somebody in the diabetes community, please let them know about Diabetes Connections, and please let me know what you would like to hear more of. We are planning for 2019. Holy cow. And I have some ideas that I'm going to probably pop in the Facebook group because I think now after all this time of doing the show and almost 200 episodes, we're at the point where I really want to make sure I'm delivering what you want to hear. So let me know. Stacey at diabetes-connections.com. There'll be some posts in the Facebook group coming up. And I really hope that you will, make this as interactive as we can. Thank you, as always, to my editor, John Buchanan at Audio Editing Solutions. I hope everybody has a great, safe Thanksgiving. I hope whatever is on your table is bolus worthy. And I hope if you're spending time with family that you enjoy. If you're not traveling or if you are alone on this Thanksgiving, reach out on social media if you'd like. The diabetes community, the diabetes online community doesn't stop because it's a holiday. In fact, if you need us, we are here more than ever. Nobody with diabetes needs to be alone, and certainly not on Thanksgiving. I will say, as you know, I'm so thankful for the opportunity to do this show. I'm so thankful to you as you listen. I'm Stacey Sims. I'll see you back here next week.
Diabetes Connections is a production of Stacey Sims Media. All rights reserved, all wrongs avenged.